Alright guys, so we are going to start documenting the build process for these work carving head 40s. So this process is probably going to take place over a few days, possibly a few weeks. There's still a few things I'm waiting on, primarily the nuts for the wheel hardware on the other side of the bolts. But basically what we're starting off with is we have a 6.5 inch wedge barrel. So although this is a wedge barrel, I checked it out and it actually lines up with the work faces and the work lips. So that's good to go. We already grinded all the old sealant off this barrel. So basically I just use a wire wheel, drill attachment, and a drill. I go around and I grind off all the sealant. And then that also scores up this surface a little bit, which actually allows the new silicone to adhere a little bit better. The faces have been recently re-chromed, and then the lips are brand new. So these are 2.5 inch lips. Since this is a sandwich mount, the face is 1/2 inch thick, so that's going to put our total final width at 9.5 inches. So since the face and lip are basically brand new, we do not need to grind off any of the old sealant. Basically all we're going to be doing is wiping everything down with alcohol before we start stacking it together. And then we're going to inspect to make sure there's no dirt or burrs or sharp edges, anything like that. That's going to prevent the wheels, or the parts of the wheel rather, from sitting perfectly flush together. So I got my alcohol, I got a lint-free cloth, and then I'm going to be wearing gloves just so that after I wipe everything down with the alcohol, I'm not transferring any of the oil from my hands back onto it. Alright, so here is the face stacked onto the barrel. Keep in mind that most wheels will actually go barrel, lip, and then the face will go on top of that. There are actually some variants of wheels that go barrel, lip, and then the face underneath all of that. But in this case, since I said earlier this is a sandwich mount, it's going to go barrel, face, lip. The other thing I want to touch on is earlier I showed you guys the wedge barrels. The reason I'm using wedge barrels is because my buddy Ben actually had an extra set laying around that he no longer needed. So as opposed to buying brand new barrels in an effort to save money, I actually am using his. And the reason his have so many holes in them is because they're designed to fit a whole bunch of different versions of wedge wheels. The other thing I want to add is when you are putting the lips, barrels, and faces together, take note of the valve stem. So right here, the valve stem is drilled. This is actually not in the correct location if I wanted to use this cutout in the face. So what I'm actually going to be doing instead is running a hidden valve stem. So the valve stem hole positioning actually does not matter in my case. But if you are building the wheel and you want the valve stem to be in the original location, you'll have to take note. Sometimes the valve stem will come out in between two hardware holes in a cut in the face, just like this. Sometimes the valve stem will actually come through one of the hardware holes. So you'll just have to take note of that and keep that in mind when you're ordering it, as well as when you're going to assemble it. And here is the wheel with the lip on now. So this is a 18-inch standard 40 hole reverse lip. So once you set this on, you kind of want to line these holes up as best as possible, but you'll be able to wiggle around and get it perfect as you start putting the bolts in. So what we're going to do now is start putting all 40 bolts in and get it all lined up. And then after that, we'll be able to transfer it over to its side. Alright, so here is all 40 bolts in the holes. So we're getting ready to transfer this over to its side. Now, some of these bolts we could not get in all the way by hand. So what you can actually do is take an 8mm 12-point socket. That's usually what these bolt heads are. It depends on the wheel though. Some wheels use different hardware. But once we get this over to its side, we'll be able to wiggle this around a little bit more and then use that socket to work these bolts in the rest of the way. Alright, now we have all 40 bolts fully seated. We are now ready to put the nuts onto the other side. Now, I'm using this roller that I got off this guy. I'll put his at in the screen, but it's Aiden. He makes these rollers and sells them. So this is called the Spinna. But this is super useful for taking apart and putting back together 3-piece wheels, especially when it comes time to seal these. But it's also useful for going around and torquing the hardware too. So this is super nice if you guys find yourself working on 3-piece wheels often. This is definitely worth the investment. If you didn't have this, the other thing you'd have to do is probably roll the wheel across the ground. Or actually, this one time I built a ghetto rig with jack stands and a PVC pipe, and let me just tell you, that wasn't fun at all. So this roller actually makes life so much easier when it comes to anything for 3-piece wheels. Alright, so we are back. We got our M7 nuts here. So we ended up taking out one bolt for the valve stem because I need to have the bolt out in order to get the valve stem in. So after these get ceramic coated, I'm going to install the valve stem and then put that hardware back in. But basically, you just go around and torque these. You want to start off in a star pattern. So with 40 holes, you're going to skip every 16. So you're going to put one on, skip 16, one on, 16, one on, so on and so forth. And then you're going to split that star in half. Do the same thing again. And if you want, you can split it 2 more times. But that's all up to you. Once it is all torqued down from this part, I actually like to go around and torque the entire thing again in a circle. So that's what I'm going to be doing right now. Also, I personally like to use blue Loctite on the threads for the nut. Now you only need a drop of this. Some people like to do all the nuts, some people like to do only some, maybe the first 10 or so, but I'm going to be doing all of them. And normally when you do this, you want to torque the nut side of the hardware, but for whatever reason, the way that Wed's created this barrel, it's impossible to fit a socket in there and torque it from the nut side. So I'm actually going to be torquing it from the bolt side. I did 2 of the other wheels already and it worked out fine. The reason for this being that you want to do it on the nut side is that sometimes you can scratch up that finish on the hardware. So if you're anal about that kind of stuff, then you'll want to try and torque it from the nut side if possible. But I'm torquing it from the bolt head side. The torque value is usually 18 to 20 foot-pounds, and I'm going to be doing 18 foot-pounds for mine. Also, it's important to note the correct bolt diameter and nut diameter for whatever wheel you're rebuilding. Every company likes to use a different diameter. I know SSR usually likes to use M6. Work uses M7, so we're using M7. And then most American wheel companies will actually use M8. But 9 out of 10 times, the bolt is always a 10mm socket for that, no matter what the inner diameter difference is between those. So here are the first 5. We went boom, 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 and boom. Now we're going to split this in half and we're going to do another star. And then I'll probably do another star after that because I'm extra. But at that point, everything here should be sealed pretty evenly. So then you can kind of just start putting the hardware all the way around and torque it. And then go one more time in a circle and torque it. And then you should be done. So I'll probably come back once this is all done. Alright, it is the next day. We have all of our nuts torqued. Everything is good to go. Loctite's good. So now what I like to do is take this blue painter's tape, aka masking tape, and then we're going to tape on either side of where we're going to put the silicone, and this will make sure that we don't have a bunch of excess on here and it makes the bead nice and clean. So here's what it looks like with the tape. I like to fold the end of the tape right here to create this little pull tab. That'll make it a lot faster and easier to rip it off once we're done laying the silicone. Alright, we now have both wheels taped up. Now before we begin sealing, I like to wipe everything down right in the seam where the silicone is going to be going with alcohol and a lint-free cloth. Now I already did both wheels. You want to keep in mind that you want to do all the steps for the wheels at the same time if you're going to be sealing multiple wheels, because the silicone actually starts to get super tacky in between. So if you spend too much time on one wheel and then you start on another wheel and still have a bunch of steps to do before you actually put the silicone down, that silicone is going to tack up on you and it's actually going to make it harder to apply for the next wheel. And now we're getting ready to seal the wheel. Here is the silicone that I like to use. It doesn't really matter what kind you use as long as it adheres to metal well and it's also strong. I also like the 10-year mold free, so keep an eye out when you look out for this stuff. So basically what we're going to do is I'm going to load this into my battery powered caulk gun. You can use a hand caulk gun if you want. I have a battery powered one because it makes it easier. Once we lay this bead, we are actually going to smooth the bead. Some people like to use their fingers, I'm actually going to be using this Truly can because it keeps a nice little space in the middle there. If the barrel and lip were touching together, I usually use a quarter to go through and smooth the bead, but since this is a sandwich mount and the gap is wider, I needed to use something with a larger diameter. The most important thing is that you have full coverage between all the spots that could potentially let air through, and then you also want the bead to be lower than everything else so that when the tire gets mounted on here, it doesn't potentially snag the bead and rip it, because then you're just going to have an air leak. So that's what we're going to be doing with the Truly can. Now we're going to lay the bead, do the Truly can, then we're going to peel the tape, then I'm going to run through with this putty knife just straight across, and we're going to scrape off all the excess that may have raised over the edges higher than we need it to be, and then that wheel will be done. And here is the final product after doing all the steps I just talked about. So this is going to take about 24 hours to cure, and then it'll be ready to mount a tire on. So looks super good, has full coverage, should be good to go. So all four wheels are now done. Those two are pretty much almost done curing. So we're gonna give these 24 hours. I'm actually getting these ceramic coated next, and then after that we'll be putting the tires on. But just try to resist the urge to touch this, because I don't know about you guys, but I always kind of get the urge to stick my finger in it for some reason. But once it's dry and cured, you can finger it all you want.